Hey everyone, I work as a therapist and I'm also finishing up my doctorate in psychology, and today I want to dig into something pretty specific, the kind of person avoidant partners actually end up falling for. Here's how I usually notice this pattern, and I'd genuinely love to hear a therapist's take on it too. When I look at couples where one person is avoidant, I start paying attention to the traits of the other partner as well. Say you've got a dismissive avoidant woman married to an anxious, preoccupied man, or any similar pairing over a long-term relationship. What I keep noticing is that the partners avoidant people choose tend to share a lot of the same qualities, and often the avoidant person will straight up say, "I fell for them because of this or that." So there really does seem to be a pattern, whether people want to acknowledge it or not. I think avoidant people genuinely fall hard for a particular type of person, and that's what we're unpacking today, along with the traits that tend to draw them in. If you don't check every single box, that's completely fine. You can choose to work on some of these qualities if you want to, but there's no requirement to. Nobody's flawless, and that's totally normal. Also, keep in mind this is really just me thinking out loud based on patterns I've observed, not some universal truth. I'm a therapist, so my perspective is naturally limited. I mostly see people who actually show up to therapy. So, take everything I say here with a healthy dose of skepticism. Honestly, that goes for everything on Avoidant Connection, not just this video. I'm not perfect, nobody is, and your own judgment should always outweigh mine. That's really the best way I can put it. The first quality is being someone who handles their emotions well, staying calm, and either processing your feelings quietly on your own or expressing them out loud in a way that doesn't feel like too much. This genuinely makes avoidant people feel safe, respected, and more connected to you. It builds real attachment. The second trait is steering clear of games, especially manipulation. Look, nobody's perfect and mistakes happen, but the key is you're not trying to manipulate them on purpose. You communicate honestly and openly instead of using manipulative tactics, because that keeps your avoidant partner from feeling overwhelmed or on edge. That's the simplest way I can explain it. The third trait is holding on to a positive outlook. I really like this one because it benefits relationships across the board, not just with avoidant partners. If you generally view relationships and life through a hopeful lens, and that shows up in how you talk and carry yourself, it makes a difference. For example, if you're watching a couple go through something public and difficult, like a politician and their spouse, and you say something like, "I really admire that they stayed together through all of that," you're not directing it at your partner specifically, you're just sharing how you genuinely feel. But that kind of comment quietly shifts how your avoidant partner views love and relationships, because they're absorbing your outlook even though you never said a word directly to them. The fourth trait is correcting your partner in a respectful, private way. Maybe they said something a little off or got a fact wrong, and you feel it's worth mentioning, but not in front of other people. So you wait until things have settled down, then pull them aside and gently bring it up. If it's a minor thing, it might not even be worth mentioning at all. But if it matters, maybe they said you'd been together 2 years when it's actually closer to 3, you address it privately instead of correcting them publicly. That small choice to protect their dignity in front of others makes a real difference in how safe they feel with you. Here's the kind of thing that lands well. "Hey, I wanted to mention this. I know you shared that with everyone, but we've actually been together almost 3 years now." Correcting someone this way, kindly and privately, without putting them on the spot, is 100% the move. The fifth trait is valuing someone's effort more than the end result, most of the time anyway. You hold this standard for yourself and for them, and you say it out loud. "I appreciate how hard you're trying," or "I love that we're a couple who puts in real effort." You're not fixated on outcomes or asking why something hasn't happened yet. You're acknowledging the progress and the trying itself. That's really all it takes, and avoidant people respond strongly to this, along with anyone who shows this kind of appreciation consistently. Another trait I see avoidant people gravitate toward is someone who doesn't hold on to things. I notice this constantly in couples therapy. It's usually one of the first things they bring up. Someone might say, "I know I want to fix things in my marriage, and I know she tends to release a lot of small stuff instead of holding on to it, even though I know it builds up sometimes. I want to be better because of that." They bring this up again and again. I really love that they don't dwell on the little stuff. It's one of my favorite things about them, and it makes me want to be a better partner. What counts as little obviously varies person to person, but generally speaking, avoid dwelling on things. Understand that sometimes letting something go for now, not forever, is what actually builds connection. The next trait is giving space while still staying consistent. I know that sounds like a contradiction, but stick with me. You allow room when it's needed, while still showing up and staying present. You keep communicating, checking in, sending a text. Something like, "I'll give you the evening to yourself, I'll check in tomorrow," works well. The key word is consistency. Following that is moving through life with a sense of confidence about how things will turn out. Not arrogance. Arrogance actually pushes avoidant people further away. Instead, you model genuine curiosity about life. Maybe you're unhappy at your current job, you've got some savings set aside, and you decide to apply elsewhere. You land a couple of interviews, and even without an offer in hand yet, you know you can rely on your savings for a while, so you go ahead and leave your job to focus on yourself. Is that necessarily the smartest move? Depends on the situation, honestly, but what matters is that you're moving through your life with that kind of self-trust, and you're modeling curiosity rather than fear. Why does this matter so much? Because people often fall for qualities in a partner that they admire, but also ones they secretly wish they had themselves. Avoidant people tend to wrestle with control. I was avoidant myself once, and I had real issues around controlling my schedule, to the point where it pushed people away, and honestly, I didn't even notice or care at the time. I've grown past that now, but here's what happens. When someone models curiosity instead of control, it quietly teaches avoidant people that rigidity isn't the only option. They don't have to fear every outcome or grip everything so tightly. They don't have to operate from a "my way and I know best" mindset. They usually don't even like this part of themselves, but it's often the only way they've known how to function since childhood. So, when they watch someone else move through life differently, especially if that person gets a good outcome, it plants a seed. It shows them there's another way to exist, and that means a lot to them. Next is validating their emotions, acknowledging how they feel in vulnerable moments without judging them for it, which builds real trust over time. Following that is being someone who's honest with them directly. This depends on how long you've been together, but plenty of avoidant people will openly say in therapy, "I really respect that my partner tells me the truth as it is, and I trust their perspective." It doesn't need to happen constantly, just often enough to matter. The last one for today is actually talking about yourself, and I know a lot of you struggle with this. I see it constantly in session, and I read it in your comments too. You ask about their day, their life, you let them talk, but you rarely bring up your own experiences, or you downplay them. Please make space to share parts of your own life too. Your experiences matter just as much. Expressing that also shows self-respect and self-belief, and it means you're not constantly centering your partner above yourself, which, surprisingly, can make them uncomfortable. Avoidant people genuinely dislike being placed on a pedestal. It feels unsettling to them. A lot of this traces back to childhood. Many of them were put on a pedestal early on, and I might explore that more another time, but I'll give you a quick personal example before moving on. I've mentioned before that my dad is avoidant, and growing up he taught me things like, "Don't show emotion," and similar messages. My parents divorced, and early on I mirrored a lot of my dad's patterns. Because of that, my mum, who leans anxious, became very attached to me and placed a lot of expectations on me, which only pushed me further away and became exhausting. But it was actually those expectations that ended up shaping what came next. Even though she was deeply attached to me, she was also, without realizing it, placing me on a pedestal, partly because she was trying to make up for what she never got from my dad, and subconsciously hoping she could reshape him through me. It didn't work. I withdrew, and that only made her more anxious, but she kept holding me up on this really elevated pedestal regardless. Here's the thing about being placed on a pedestal. Avoidant people experience this in a very specific way. Someone who's anxious, preoccupied usually can't fully grasp this because they haven't lived it themselves. But if you're avoidant, or you used to be, being put on a pedestal often translates subconsciously into, "If I don't meet your expectations, you're going to react badly." That's genuinely the emotional experience, even though that's rarely what the other person actually means. When you put someone on a pedestal, you end up constantly chasing after them, expecting more and more, and becoming fixated on how they turn out. Even if you're not consciously thinking, "If you're not exactly this way, I'll be upset," that underlying fear is still what avoidant people often feel based on past experience. I'm speaking from personal experience here, and many of you might discover your partners carry this same feeling. So try not to elevate them onto a pedestal. Share pieces of yourself too. Your life matters just as much as theirs. You're equals in this relationship, not one above the other. The next trait is being non-judgmental. Avoidant individuals feel genuinely safe in spaces where they're not being judged. and that safety is what allows real trust to grow in a relationship. And the final trait is bringing new experiences into the relationship, doing something together that feels fresh, whether it's new for them, for you, or both. Try rock climbing, chess, anything really. This helps them see you in a different light and appreciate different sides of who you are, all without feeling like they're expected to change to fit some mold. So let's quickly recap everything we covered. Manage your emotions well. Skip the games and manipulation. Keep a positive outlook. Correct your partner privately and kindly. Value their effort more than the outcome, most of the time. Learn to let some things go. Little isn't really the perfect word for it, but you get the idea. Give space when it's needed, while staying consistent and present. Move through life with confidence, curiosity, and steady presence. Validate their emotions in vulnerable moments. Be honest with them. Every so often, it helps build their trust in your perspective. Talk about your own life and goals sometimes too. Stay non-judgmental and bring new experiences into the relationship together. Just to clarify, a few things I mentioned throughout this video, since some of you might be newer to these terms. When I talk about someone being avoidant, I'm referring to what's called an avoidant attachment style, which usually shows up as a tendency to pull away from closeness, downplay emotional needs, and feel uncomfortable with too much dependency or vulnerability in a relationship. Within that, there's a more specific type called dismissive avoidant, which describes someone who tends to suppress their emotions almost entirely, values independence to an extreme degree, and often convinces themselves they don't need close relationships as much as they actually do. It's less about not caring, and more about having learned early on that relying on others wasn't safe or reliable. On the other end, I mentioned anxious preoccupied, which is a different attachment style altogether. This describes someone who craves closeness and reassurance, often worries about being abandoned or not being loved enough, and tends to seek a lot of validation from their partner. Where avoidant people tend to create distance to feel safe, anxious, preoccupied people tend to seek closeness to feel safe, sometimes to the point of feeling overwhelmed by their own need for connection. These two styles often end up paired together in relationships, which is part of why I brought up that pattern earlier. I also used the term pedestal a few times, and what I mean by that is a situation where one partner places extremely high, often unrealistic expectations on the other person, sometimes idealizing them so much that the other person feels pressure to constantly perform or meet a certain standard just to keep the relationship stable. It's not always intentional or even conscious, but it creates a dynamic where the person on the pedestal feels like there's no room to be flawed or human without risking disappointment or conflict. And when I referenced control issues earlier, I was talking about a common pattern in avoidant attachment, where someone feels a strong need to manage their environment, schedule, or decisions tightly, often as a way of protecting themselves from unpredictability or emotional overwhelm, rather than it being about power for its own sake. I hope breaking these down helps make the rest of the video easier to connect with, since understanding these terms really is the foundation for everything else we talked about today. When I mentioned not playing games or not manipulating your partner, I'm talking about any pattern where someone tries to influence another person's feelings, decisions, or behavior through indirect or dishonest means, rather than being upfront about what they want or need. This can look like guilt tripping, giving someone the silent treatment to punish them, exaggerating emotions to get a certain reaction, or saying one thing while doing another to keep someone off balance. It's usually less about malicious intent and more about not knowing how to communicate directly, but the effect on an avoidant partner is still the same. It makes them feel unsafe, unsure of where they stand, and more likely to withdraw even further. I also think it's worth explaining what I meant by modeling curiosity, since that phrase can sound a little abstract on its own. Basically, this means showing genuine openness and interest in life, in new experiences, in outcomes you can't fully predict or control, without needing everything to go exactly as planned. Instead of approaching decisions from a place of fear or rigid control, you approach them with a sense of exploration, a willingness to try something, even without guaranteed results. For someone who's avoidant and has spent years gripping tightly to control as a way of feeling safe, watching a partner move through life this way can be quietly transformative. It shows them there's another way to exist that isn't rooted in constant vigilance or fear of the unknown. So let's take a step back and really sit with everything we've talked about today, because I think it's easy to walk away from a video like this and just remember a checklist: manage your emotions, don't play games, promote positivity, and so on, without really absorbing why any of this matters in the first place. And I think that's the piece I want to leave you with as we wrap up. This isn't really about becoming a different person or performing a role just to make an avoidant partner fall for you or stay with you. That's not the goal here. And honestly, if that's the only reason you're doing any of this, it probably won't work long term anyway, because avoidant people, maybe even more than most, can sense when something feels performative versus when it feels genuine. They've spent their whole lives learning to read rooms, read tone, read the subtle difference between what someone says and what they actually mean, because for a lot of them, that skill was survival. So the traits we talked about today aren't really a formula, they're more like a description of what emotional safety looks like from the outside. And it just so happens that avoidant people respond strongly to that safety because so much of their life has been the opposite of it. I want to be really clear about something too. None of this means you have to shrink yourself, walk on eggshells, or constantly manage someone else's nervous system for them. That's not healthy for you. And honestly, it's not sustainable. And it's not even what avoidant people actually want, even if it feels that way sometimes. What we're talking about is something much more balanced than that. It's about being steady, being honest, being kind without being self-erasing, and giving someone room to be imperfect without punishing them for it, while also expecting the same respect in return. Because I think sometimes when people hear, give them space, or don't call them out too much, or let go of little things, they interpret that as, I have to be endlessly patient and endlessly available and never have needs of my own. That's not it at all. In fact, one of the things we talked about, remember, talk about yourself too, is literally the opposite of that. You matter in this dynamic just as much as they do. You're not a caretaker, you're not a coach, you're not there to fix them or manage them. You're a partner, an equal, someone with your own inner life, your own needs, your own moments of vulnerability that deserve to be seen too. And I think that's really the heart of everything I've shared today, this idea of equality within the relationship, rather than one person constantly accommodating the other. Because when you really break down all these traits, calmness, honesty, positivity, respectful correction, valuing effort, letting go of small things, giving space while staying present, moving through life with curiosity instead of control, validating emotions, being direct sometimes, sharing your own life, staying non-judgmental, bringing in new experiences, what you start to notice is that none of these are exclusively for the avoidant partner. These are just, generally speaking, the ingredients of a secure, healthy relationship period. They benefit anyone, regardless of attachment style. It just so happens that avoidant individuals are especially sensitive to the presence or absence of these things, because their nervous systems have often been shaped by relationships where these things were missing, inconsistent, or overwhelming in the opposite direction. I also want to gently remind you of something I said earlier in the video. This is not a universal truth, and it's not meant to be some rigid rule book you follow perfectly in order to earn love from an avoidant partner. I shared these patterns because I've noticed them again and again in the therapy room, in the specific slice of relationships I happen to have access to as a therapist. But that's exactly what it is, a slice. I don't get to see every relationship in the world. I only see the ones that walk through my door, the ones willing to sit in a room and talk about their pain, their patterns, their fears. So please, take everything I've said today and filter it through your own experience, your own relationship, your own partner's specific history and needs. Because at the end of the day, you know your relationship far better than I ever could from the outside looking in through a screen. I also want to acknowledge something that I think gets lost sometimes in conversations like this, and that's the fact that growth isn't linear and it isn't instant. If you're someone who struggles with a few of these traits, maybe you tend to correct people publicly without meaning to, maybe you struggle to talk about yourself, maybe you've unintentionally put someone on a pedestal without realizing it. Please don't hear this video as a list of your failures. Hear it instead as a map, a set of directions you can slowly move toward, one small shift at a time. Nobody, and I really mean nobody, embodies all of these traits perfectly, all the time, in every single moment of their relationship. I certainly don't, and I say that as someone who studies this stuff for a living and has spent years actively working on my own attachment patterns. Growth in relationships tends to look more like a spiral than a straight line. You circle back to old patterns sometimes, you catch yourself doing better other times, and slowly, over months and years, the overall direction trends upward, even if any single week looks messy. I think it's also worth saying, especially for those of you who identify as avoidant yourselves, or used to, like I did, that healing isn't just the responsibility of the partner who's more anxious or more expressive. It goes both ways. If you're avoidant, learning to tolerate closeness, learning to sit with vulnerability instead of fleeing from it, learning to receive love without immediately feeling smothered or controlled, that's real work too, and it deserves just as much compassion and patience as anything we've discussed today. This isn't a one-sided equation where the non-avoidant partner does all the emotional labor while the avoidant partner simply receives it. The goal, always, is mutual growth, mutual safety, mutual effort. Both people showing up, both people softening old patterns, both people learning new ways of being close to another human being. I think what I really want you to walk away with today isn't a checklist to memorize, but a feeling, a sense of what safety actually feels like inside a relationship, and permission to build that safety without losing yourself in the process. Because ultimately, the traits avoidant people fall in love with aren't complicated tricks or secret techniques. They're simply the markers of a person who feels secure enough in themselves to be calm, honest, curious, and kind, without needing constant reassurance or control to feel okay. And when you can offer that from a place of genuine wholeness rather than anxious performance, it doesn't just help your avoidant partner feel safer, it makes your entire relationship stronger, steadier, and more resilient over time. So if you take one thing from this video, let it be this: you don't need to change who you are to be lovable to an avoidant partner. You simply need to become more fully, calmly, confidently yourself, and trust that real connection can exist even with someone who's still learning how to receive it. Relationships with avoidant partners aren't about chasing someone into vulnerability. They're about creating an environment steady and safe enough that vulnerability starts to feel possible on its own. And that takes time, patience, and yes, a fair amount of grace for them and for yourself too. Thank you so much for sticking with me through this whole video. I know it was a longer one, but I really do hope it gave you some insight, whether you're avoidant yourself in a relationship with someone who is, or just curious about attachment patterns in general. If this resonated with you at all, I'd really appreciate it if you hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. It genuinely helps this channel grow and lets me keep making videos like this one. And as always, take everything I say with a grain of salt. Trust your own instincts and experience above anything you hear from me. I'll see you all in the next video. Take care of yourselves and take care of each other. I really hope this was helpful for someone out there. If it was, feel free to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one.